Imagine climbing down 130 meters into the earth. No light or sound, just you, a rope, and the impending darkness. The Scarson Glacier Cave sits high in the Maritime Alps, right on the border of France and Italy. And inside, it isn't just cave dark or nighttime dark. It's the kind of darkness that doesn't reflect light at all. The kind your eyes never adjust to, because there's nothing for them to adjust to. Down there, time doesn't slow down. It dissolves. Michel Siffre knew this might happen. When he descended into the Scarson Glacier Cave in 1962, the plan was simple. Live in complete darkness for 2 months. No sun or clocks. No sense of day or night whatsoever. He had researchers on the other end of a phone line, and he knew somewhere in the back of his mind that in 2 months someone was going to come pull him back up into the light. That certainly should have saved him from any critical troubles he might have had, but it didn't, not really. By the end of the experiment, his body had drifted into this bizarre 48-hour cycle, which he was awake for more than a day, but then would crash for half of the next day. And when he was finally brought up to the surface into the light 2 months later, he said, "I think it's day 35. And the researchers just went quiet because it was not day 35, it was day 63. He came out pale, shaking even, and his eyes were unable to tolerate the sunlight, of course, and his body temperature even dropped. His mind seemed loose and wrong in some way. He said he had emerged like a broken marionette, strings out, movements off, something misaligned that he just couldn't name. And that was only after 2 months, with human voices on the phone, and with hope even, and with a known end date. So 10 years later, Michel went back, for 6 months this time. And that's when things truly came apart. By month 2, he'd lost motivation entirely. Time stopped being something he could feel. He sank into a depression so deep he described the cave as a living hell. His sleep shattered, his eyesight worsened, his mind turned inward, and then began to eat itself. He survived, of course, but he said it brought him to the very edge of madness. And here's what that tells us. The sun isn't just warmth, and certainly not just light. It's structure. It's the chemical proof that you are alive now, in this moment, in this body, on this day. Take it away long enough, and the human mind doesn't stay human any longer. Siffre had 2 months, then 6 months. Remember, he had a phone line, researchers, a rope back to the world, that hope, right? Blanche Monnier had none of that. She had an attic, and she lived decades in the dark. This is part 3 of the Blanche Monnier story, the woman who was swallowed by darkness and was never allowed to climb out. Before we dive into part 3, let's recap to understand what we've already uncovered. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, stop right now and go back, because what's coming may feel confusing if you don't. Part 1 introduced us to Louise Monnier, and the moment you met her, you knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a strict mother. She was a woman who used food as punishment and saw her children as extensions of her. She raised her children without the warmth of maternal love and acceptance. 2 children grew up under her roof. Her son Marcel, the oldest, got freedom, and her daughter Blanche, the youngest, got rules that tightened every year like a noose. Part 2 is where it all collapsed. Blanche fell in love with Victor Cameil, a Protestant lawyer Louise saw as a stain on the family name. And Louise didn't argue with Blanche or plead with her to see her reason. Rather, she went to doctors and told them her daughter was sick. Sick in a way that required treatment. Treatments like ice baths that made Blanche scream, or treatments like potassium bromide tonics, which was a sedative that didn't just dull Blanche's mind, it dismantled it piece by piece until she couldn't even remember who she used to be. And who did Blanche used to be? Anyone who knew her said she was beautiful, talented, cultured, a free spirit, gentle, generous, charitable, the kind of person people wanted to be around. And sadly, Marie Fazy and her sister Modeste, who were the main long-standing maids of the Monnier household, said, Blanche suffered a great deal because of the authoritarian character of her mother, who took pleasure in upsetting her. Modeste gave specific examples, like the time in 1870 when 21-year-old Blanche begged to attend a local party, something small and normal. Louise said no. Blanche pleaded with her. And you might be wondering, why would a 21-year-old woman need her mother's permission to attend some local party? Because in 19th century France, an unmarried woman was not legally or socially autonomous, even as an adult. So Blanche was, in many ways, her mother's legal extension. And this is no social pressure either. This was literally the law. Under the very much enforced Napoleonic Code, a woman reached legal age at 21 years old. But unmarried daughters living at home remained under parental authority. And just as an aside, Marcel, the boy, lived under no such law, and he could come and go as he pleased when he reached the legal age of 21. Mothers and fathers controlled their unmarried daughters' social activities, movements outside the home, reputation, and even their marriage prospects. And it makes sense if you think about it through the lens of the time, because going to a party wasn't going to just a party. It meant being seen in public, evaluated, and possibly being courted by men who she may not be chaperoned with. Explicit maternal approval was required, especially if there were men present and the mother wasn't there to supervise. So it makes perfect sense that if Louise didn't want to go to the party or couldn't go to the party for whatever reason, she would have to decline Blanche's request to go. But here's the thing, because Blanche wanted to go to this party so much that she started to plead with her mother. She begged so much that her father finally agreed to take her himself. Problem solved, right? Blanche gets to go to the party, she'll be chaperoned by her own father, Louise doesn't even have to be there. Win-win. But what does Louise do instead? She certainly doesn't say, oh, thank goodness your father can take you. I didn't want you to miss out. No. She attacked Blanche's appearance instead. She said cruel and cutting remarks that were so vicious and cruel that Blanche abandoned her plans entirely and spent the whole night locked in her room crying. So you tell me, what does that say about Louise's intentions? Because this particular occasion certainly wasn't about propriety or protecting her daughter's reputation. This was about control. And when Louise couldn't control the situation, she made sure Blanche destroyed herself instead. The maids gave another example of the dynamic at home regarding the piano. Blanche loved to play the piano and often did. And I don't know why, but for some reason Louise hated it. Every time Blanche sat down at the keys, Louise would start complaining that it was too loud or improper, whatever that means. And she was so incessant about it until Blanche either slammed the keys in frustration and ran to her room, or until both Blanche and Louise were both screaming at each other in the middle of the house. One time, Blanche snapped at her mother and icily said, "Say it's too loud one more time and see what happens. Go away, mother. Go away right now and do something useful if you know how. Get out of my sight." Because that was Blanche too. She could bite back when cruelty was hurled at her. And Emile would come into the room and calm things down between them. Blanche would always listen to her father. Remember, everyone knew Blanche as this kind, generous, and caring person, not just to her father and her brother, but everyone else outside the house. Until Louise walked in anyway, with her venom and control. Blanche wasn't some spoiled, volatile daughter lashing out at the world. She wasn't defiant, but really, I think, in survival mode. And I think that these little indignities that Blanche had to endure with each passing year were building towards something much, much bigger. So it's 1874, and you'll recall that Marcel is off enjoying his Parisian honeymoon with his brand new wife, and while he's gone, Louise is busy at home, rearranging things and making new accommodations. Now, in homes like the Monniers, the ground floor was where you received guests and performed respectability. The first floor above was where the family slept, the proper bedrooms, all near each other. The second floor up would be reserved for servants. And then there's the attic. And it wasn't like some cutesy-dootsy attic with some charming guest suite that you might, rent out on Airbnb. It wasn't some cozy spare room with good light, warm blankets. It was really just dead space, and there was even a spare room right next to it in the Monnier home, but no one even used that room, which is exactly why Louise chose it, I think. You don't hide someone where people might look. Louise moves Blanche from her first floor bedroom to the attic upstairs. And I find it funny that she did this right after Marcel leaves the house, literally while he's still on his honeymoon. This attic was 5.4 meters by 3.4 meters, and that's about 200 square feet, or about the size of a backyard shed. Smaller than a one-car garage, really. And by putting Blanche there in the tiny attic room, Louise didn't just isolate her daughter. She erased her from the rhythm of the house entirely, silenced her by tucking her away up there. No sounds drifting downstairs when guests arrived. No one walking past her door by accident. And this is what I find interesting. Blanche isn't fighting this. She's not screaming or resisting or demanding to stay in her old room. Louise didn't have to drag her there physically, because by now, she's been on potassium bromide for 2 full years. And it takes less than a year for the long-term effects of this tonic to show. And we've already seen the effects at Marcel's wedding. If you recall, Blanche was trembling, she had these nervous tics, and she was laughing at like the air, at nothing really. And the way she spoke to people who weren't there, like she was having conversations with invisible friends. By 1874, Blanche isn't the same person who fell in love with Victor Cameil. She's already been chemically dismantled. So when Louise tells her it's time to move upstairs, Blanche just follows. And I want to pause here and ask you something that feels important to me, and also complicated. Is Blanche being imprisoned? Or is she complying? Because she's not chained, and she's not dragging, kicking, and screaming up those stairs. She just goes. So what do we call that? Is it imprisonment if the lock is chemical instead of metal? If the cage is built inside someone's mind before it's ever built around their body? I don't have a clean answer for that. But I want to know what you think. Where do you think coercion ends and captivity begins? And if someone's been broken down so thoroughly that they can't even recognize they're being destroyed, does it even matter what we call it? Drop your thoughts now down in the comments, because I feel like it's going to get harder to answer this question the further we get into Blanche's next decades of life. Later, the maids who worked in the house said something I find deeply chilling. They said there were days when Blanche just disappeared. Not physically, of course, but mentally. She'd stare at nothing, completely detached, like she'd severed every connection to the world around her. Like reality had been something she couldn't touch anymore, or at least maybe didn't want to. But then there were other days, the days when Blanche was furious, when something inside her snapped back into focus. And all that rage, confusion, fear, and betrayal, it all came pouring out in the only way she had left. She screamed insults, the crudest, ugliest words she knew. Bitch, bitches girl, fuckers, buggers. Those aren't words a young woman like Blanche Monnier was supposed to know. When you strip someone of everything, their autonomy, their future, and their mind, what's left isn't polite. What's left is raw, survival in its ugliest, most desperate form. But I think that the little part of the true Blanche was still in there, the one who was strong and knew how to fight for her life. And the maids heard it all. And during the trial, it came out that the neighbors heard her too. Ever since the rumors started about Blanche's engagement and about Louise's refusal of that engagement, about the fights, neighbors reported hearing screaming coming from the Monnier house, consistent screaming, the kind you can't really mistake for anything else. And again, here's what gets me. This had been going on for over 2 years by this point. 2 years, long enough for Marcel to meet someone, fall in love, get married, and now have a baby girl that he named Dolores in 1875. They called her Lola. 2 full years of a woman screaming inside that house, and no one said a word. But to be fair, people did ask about Blanche sometimes, but it was more of in a way you ask about anyone in polite society. If you ran into Louise at a wedding or passed her on the street, you might say, "And how is Blanche doing?" It was expected, and of course it was using your manners. But no one ever knocked on the door when they heard the screaming. No one called for help, a wellness check even. No one demanded to see her. And yes, I know people kept to themselves back then because privacy was so sacred. You didn't meddle in another family's business, especially not a family like the Monniers. But here's where I think that explanation falls apart. This wasn't gossip, and it wasn't a rumor about finances or a whispered affair. This was a woman literally screaming loud enough to be heard through walls, through windows, and through the carefully maintained silence of a respectable neighborhood. So what does it say about a society when hearing a woman scream for 2 years straight isn't enough to make you act? When wealth and reputation become a louder signal than someone's suffering? Because that's exactly what this was. The Monniers were respected and established. And in 19th century France, that meant their door stayed closed, no matter what sounds came from behind it. The screaming became a problem for Louise. Not because her daughter was suffering, of course, but because people were talking. We've already seen Louise have her excuse ready, of course. "My poor Blanche suffers from a pernicious fever." She'd say it with just the right amount of concern in her voice and the kind that made you feel rude for asking more questions. But the screams didn't stop and people kept hearing them. Rumor wasn't just gossip, it was social death. So Louise came up with a solution. But there was just one problem. She had to get her husband on board with the plan without it looking nefarious. Louise was good with her words when it came to controlling her husband. Remember when she lied to Emile and called Blanche's prescription a tonic rather than the powerful sedative that it was? She said that to him to prevent him from putting any stop to it. And now she's doing it again with her plan to cover the sound of her daughter's screams. But just like before, Louise had to be careful with her words. If she went to Emile and said, "The potassium bromide isn't working anymore and Blanche is screaming, so we need to shut her in," he might start asking questions. He might want to reconsider his daughter's diagnosis, maybe. He might want to bring in another doctor for a second opinion. A doctor that perhaps Louise might not be able to so easily manipulate. But if Louise told her husband that the bromine treatment was working beautifully, she couldn't also claim that Blanche was dangerous, could she? So Louise found the perfect balance between the two options. The kind of manipulation that keeps someone worried just enough to stop thinking clearly. She told Emile that if Blanche kept screaming and nothing was done about it, a scandal would erupt. And scandals didn't just embarrass families like theirs, they destroyed them. Emile's reputation and everything he'd built would be gone. And when that wasn't enough to convince him, Louise reminded Emile of something no father in the 1870s wanted to hear. About his daughter's constant nudity, her inappropriate touching of herself, her refusal to eat. Louise went on until Emile couldn't stand it anymore. He would do whatever Louise said just to make the images in his head stop. So she got what she wanted, again. Chain and padlock shutters went up on the outside of the attic windows to block out anyone from seeing Blanche. And she had it sealed shut with caulk to smother the sound of her daughter's screams. And Emile just stood there while this is all happening, praying for things to go back to normal. Virginie Magot worked for the Monnier family as a maid.
For some time, Mademoiselle Blanche asked every day for paper and pencil in order to write. Her mother had us take them to her. Mademoiselle Blanche would write a letter and place it in an envelope. She addressed her letters to many different people. I can't remember any of the names, though. She would push the envelope between the thin gaps in the shutters, covering her window, so that the letter fell and landed in the courtyard. She would then instruct Marie Fazy, the cook, to have it taken to the post office. I was often instructed by Madame Monnier to go out by the servant's door, collect the letter, and go quietly back in through the main door, and then pretend that I was taking Mademoiselle Blanche's letter to the post office, and do it in such a convincing way that Mademoiselle Monnier would really believe I was posting it for her. Once back inside the house, I would hand the letter to Madame Monnier, who told me that when her daughter dropped letters, they should always be retrieved immediately and given straight to her. She insisted that the letters should never be opened, as they contained nothing of importance.
I think Blanche knew about the letters. After some time writing letter after letter and hearing nothing back, she had to have figured it out. The letters weren't getting lost, and they weren't being ignored by friends who suddenly stopped caring about her. Blanche must have figured out that the letters weren't leaving the house. And knowing how sharp and aware Blanche was, she probably didn't assume her friends had abandoned her. She probably knew exactly what was stopping them. The one and only antagonist in her life. But I'm just speculating, of course. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But there is something else. After this letter snatching went on long enough, Blanche didn't just get sad. She got irate. Virginia also said that after this point, Blanche wanted nothing to do with her mother. Wouldn't see her, speak to her. Blanche threw 6 chamber pots at Louise, shattering each one. I know Louise and Blanche were not the best of friends, but this is definitely an escalation. And also, just so we are on the same page, a chamber pot is like a portable toilet. It was a bowl kept in the bedroom so you didn't have to leave your room in the middle of the night to use an outhouse or a bathroom down the hall. That was what Blanche was throwing at her mother. That takes an immense amount of rage, I imagine. So what does Louise do as these chamber pots are being hurled at her? She told the maids, I won't provide her with any more of them. Let her stain her own filth. And Blanche, hearing this, as though she isn't in the room, says, I'm already in filth. So Louise takes the chamber pots away and look, I get it. No one wants a chamber pot, a full one even, hurled at them. The easiest solution is to remove the pots. Problem solved. Except it's not. Because of course, we understand that now you're not just dealing with broken porcelain, but also human waste. You still have to clean it up. You're still handling filth, arguably more of it now and in worse conditions. But I just can't get past this one thing. Okay, I can't get past several things, but if Louise really truly believed Blanche was sick, if this was all just symptoms of some tragic illness that she keeps going on and on about, this pernicious fever that she won't shut up about, wouldn't these violent outbursts or the lack of control, irrational behavior all fall under this diagnosis Louise had been selling to everyone? Why punish her for it? Because again, this was never about illness. This was about control. And you'll remember that Louise had always controlled Blanche through her most basic needs. When Blanche didn't behave as she ought to, Louise withheld food. Sent her to her room hungry, remember? Taking away the chamber pot? That's just another way to do the same thing. And keep in mind, this is on top of the ice baths that left Blanche shaking and disoriented, and the potassium bromide she was still being given day after day, dismantling her mind piece by piece. And Louise stopped paying attention to the fallout entirely. Blanche was losing a substantial amount of weight, the kind of weight drop that changes the shape of someone's face and hollows out their body. Louise didn't care though. She delegated all of Blanche's little bit of basic care to Marie Fazy, the cook turned caretaker. So Blanche turned all her affection toward Marie, and Marie was kind to her. She took the best care of Blanche she could with what little she was given under Louise's roof. Marie was the only one who could calm Blanche down when she spiraled, and she did her best to keep her clean. And no matter what, she made sure at least one meal a day made it up to the attic. Marie wasn't a nurse and certainly wasn't trained for this, but she was the only person left who treated Blanche like a human being. But she was also only human herself and could only do so much, especially when Louise seemed to try to make it so hard for her. Remember, one of the effects of long-term use is losing control of your bladder and bowels. So naturally, taking away the chamber pots caused exactly what you'd expect. But Louise doesn't realize the error of her ways and backtrack to solve the problem. She digs her heels in deeper. Doubles down on every twisted decision because, of course, Louise could never be wrong or at fault for anything. Blanche is going to soil her sheets and clothes. Well then, take those away too. No chamber pots, no sheets, no clothes. Just Blanche lying on a bare mattress in her own filth. Day after day, night after night. And that mattress started to rot. It turned black and wet and rank with waste and decay. You can guess for yourself whether Louise cared or not about her daughter living in those conditions. By June 1875, Louise had the maids remove additional items such as the drawers in the dresser and every speck of clothing there was in the room. Any fabric that remained was one soiled sheet spread across the rotting mattress, and a small scarf with holes in it for Blanche to cover her face whenever someone entered the room. By this point, the light from an open door was too much for Blanche's eyes. One warm evening, one of the maids accidentally left Blanche's door unlocked, and Blanche escaped. She first snuck into the empty room next door, next to the attic door, and looked for clothes, but there weren't any, and she climbed out the window anyway. 2 people witnessed it. They said she dangled naked from the window for a moment before dropping to the ground below. She walked up the street for about 10 to 20 minutes. No destination in mind, it seems, just walking. until she reached the large boulevard at Place du Marché Leclerc. She moved slowly along the storefronts and lingered, stopping at each window and peering into the glass like she was window shopping in the dark of the evening. Then she sat down on the large stone steps of the Hôtel de Poitiers. A few minutes later, the police arrived and wrapped a blanket around her. She was able to give them her address, and they brought her home. And now you might be asking yourself, why didn't Blanche tell the police what was happening? Why give them her address to go back? Because the few years Blanche spent confined is enough when the person controlling you is your own mother. Louise had authority over Blanche long before she ever locked the door. The confinement didn't create that power dynamic, it just pushed it to its most extreme form. And of course, it is very possible that Blanche may not have understood what was happening to her was a crime. She may have seen it as punishment. It's also possible she may have fled in a moment of panic or confusion, and when the police showed up, her instincts took over. She did what she'd always been taught to do: defer to authority, return home, restore order. And here's the part that's easy to forget. Blanche wasn't legally free the way we think of freedom today. Remember, as an unmarried woman in 19th century France, she was still under her mother's legal and social authority. So even if she had tried to accuse Louise, she may have believed that the law wouldn't be on her side anyway. So Blanche went back because in every way that mattered, socially, legally, psychologically, she didn't yet believe she was allowed to leave. And the moment the police left, Louise instructed Marie to take away Blanche's blanket that the police had wrapped around her. Then Louise went to her husband Emile and told him everything the police had said. All the lewd things Blanche had supposedly been doing while she was out there, exposed and confused in the streets. Now, why do you suppose Louise would do that? Speak to her husband, anyway. Wouldn't she be embarrassed enough by what had just happened? Her daughter naked in the streets, sitting on the steps of a hotel like she had nowhere else to go. That's already a scandal. And Louise also knows how her husband reacts to things like this. She knows exactly which words to make him flinch, which images make him shut down and stop asking questions. So do you think the police actually said those things to her? Or do you think Louise invented them, feeding Emile just enough shame and horror to make him squirm, to make him believe their daughter wasn't just sick, but dangerous? That keeping her locked away wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. And by now, this wasn't even a secret anymore. Later, when journalists interviewed people all over Poitiers, a librarian named Georges Vacher said students had been talking about Blanche since 1875. Her exotic derangement, they called it. They'd walked past the Monnier home on purpose, hoping to catch a glimpse of her naked through the window. Several of them claimed that they had seen her naked at the window themselves. Professor Gillies backed that up, but here's what gets me. Léon Marchand, the editorial secretary of Le Journal de la Vienne, said that by 1875, everyone knew Blanche had some kind of hysteria and couldn't stand clothes against her skin. He also said, "I never spoke to any student who had actually seen her. It was probably malicious gossip, but many people believed it." I understand how rumor and gossip work. You hear something so often from so many people that it becomes fact in your mind. You start to believe you witnessed it yourself, even if you never did. But I can't wrap my head around the fact that if people genuinely thought Blanche was mentally ill, if, say, that's the excuse for why no one checked on her, then why turn her into entertainment? Why make her suffering into a spectacle? Why treat a sick woman like a sideshow attraction? Was there ever a single shred of dignity Blanche was allowed to keep? 7 more years goes by where nothing changes except the rot. The deplorable conditions of the attic gets worse, and Blanche just keeps wasting away. And now I need to warn you, at this point, people around Blanche start dropping like flies. Blanche's father, Emile, dies in April of 1882. He was 62 years old, and there is no reliable record of a specific cause of death, but many mourned his death, leaving hundreds of wreaths in his memory. Louise made sure the funeral invitations were printed by the best printing house available and sent them to all the royal families of the surrounding areas. Over 1,000 people attended Emil's funeral at the cathedral, and the eulogy was said to have lasted over 2 hours long. At this time, Louise's father, Louis de Marnac, reportedly refused to attend Emil's funeral. Supposedly, he couldn't forgive his daughter Louise and his son-in-law Emile for refusing to let Blanche marry for love, and for padlocking her away like an animal. But the thing about that is, Louis was also pretty sick in his old age at the time, so this didn't really line up with what I see his refusal of going to the funeral was. Did he really skip the funeral because he was still too ill to attend, or because he didn't want anything to do with Louise and Emile after what they'd done to Blanche? At first, I wasn't sure myself and didn't really find any evidence to conclude directly one way or the other. But then I learned of something that happens later that made me ask this question to myself again. And when the time comes, I'll be curious to see if your opinions change too. So after the funeral, there's the reading of the will. And here's where things get very interesting as far as I'm concerned. Emile left Louise exactly what the law required him to: 1/4 of his estate. The absolute minimum he could get away with legally. The rest was to be split between Blanche and Marcel, which means the daughter locked in the attic and the son living his life out in the world now owned 3/4 of everything. They were the legal majority owners of the estate. And what does this mean for Louise? She just became a minority stakeholder in her own household. Louise, as you can imagine, was not about to accept less than her own children, so she bribed the notary. She paid him in cash to alter the will and make sure she remained the sole owner of all the properties. But I don't see how that went through, because the documents show that she did not retain that. So there's another layer here, fear, because I understand Louise might be scared, right? If Blanche and Marcel actually cashed in on their inheritance, Louise could end up destitute. So I get it. She's scared. I could feel her desperation. Under the law, they could demand a full list of Emile's assets. They could sell them, they could force their mother to liquidate her share of the property, and Louise would be left with essentially nothing. And I do feel for her as a human being in this moment. The fear of losing everything, of ending up with nothing after your husband dies, that's real. That's terrifying. But the more I get into this story, the harder it becomes to feel sorry for Louise. Fear was never a justification for what she did and continues to do at this point to her daughter. So Louise makes an appointment with the family lawyer, Maître Louis Baudin. The next day, he shows up at the Monnier home along with Louise and Marcel. And the lawyer does exactly what Louise needs him to do. He tells Marcel that if he wants his inheritance, he'll have to gather a full inventory of his father's assets, figure out their value, their worth. That process would be absolutely time-consuming, expensive, and probably a complete nightmare. Marcel would be better off, the lawyer explains, by just taking a substantial monthly pension from the estate instead of dealing with liquid assets. Less hassle and probably more money in the long run. Louise offers Marcel 600 francs a month, 72,000 francs a year. That's substantially more than the 5,000 francs Marcel was getting before. And just to put this into a little bit of context, most middle-class families of 3 or 4 people at the time were living on less than 200 francs a month. When Marcel and Angel signed their marriage contract, they were set to receive 5,000 francs a year, just over 400 francs a month. That was a solid bourgeois income. They were perfectly comfortable and wanted for nothing. 600 francs a month, that wasn't just comfortable, that was excess. And that was more money than they'd ever really need. And yet, Marcel rejects it. So Louise offers him 1,000 francs a month. That's 5 times what middle-class families had. And he rejects it again. And then he demands 2,500 francs a month. That's 50% of what Marcel was getting for an entire year. And the weasel says that he simply cannot accept anything less because it's the bare minimum he needed to support his family of 3, which is obviously complete crap. I must pause here because something came up for me during this moment. At first, I was rooting for Marcel, honestly. First of all, it's his inheritance. He deserves what his father wanted him to have. Second, have you ever seen Marcel stand up for anything in his life? And here he is actually pushing back, almost standing up for himself. And I'd always felt bad for Marcel, like he got dragged into his mother's behavior because he was passive and quiet and kind of a stupid man. Like he didn't know better or didn't know what to do. But now I see him and I'm watching him fight for money. which means he does have it in him. He is capable of standing up for what he wants, for what he thinks is right. He just never did it for his sister. And that made me think about him very differently. So Marcel tells his mother that if she doesn't comply and give him 2,500 francs a month, he'll claim his share of the inheritance, which could very realistically put Louise out on the street. She had no choice but to agree. And Marcel, making sure this agreement wouldn't slip through his fingers, had the notary put it in writing. That makes it a legal contract, probably knowing his mother's word didn't mean much. After Marcel left, Louise had quite a conversation with the family lawyer, Louis Bowden. She wanted to know if, given Blanche's condition of pernicious fever, would Louise need to take legal action to get what's called a judicial interdiction. A judicial interdiction is a court process where someone is appointed to manage a person's property if they are unable to do it themselves. Basically like a power of attorney. And Louise did not want to deal with that. It was expensive and time-consuming. But worse than that, it would open up their lives to scrutiny because it would be public record, their court documents. And she would probably have questions from people that she couldn't prepare for and testimony she couldn't control. So what Louise was really hoping for, and what she actually asked the lawyer to help out with, was if she could just encourage Blanche to sign a power of attorney over to her. It's July 14th, 1882. The lawyer draws up power of attorney papers and arrives at the Monnier house with Dr. Guerneau and the notary. They're there to have Blanche sign documents that would give all of her power, her inheritance, her property, her future to her mother, Louise. And I feel like I have to say this, the whole purpose of a notary is to officially verify signatures, right? That's like literally their only job, to make sure private agreements become legal and hard to challenge later. But when the notary wanted to enter Blanche's room, the doctor refused to allow him to. Because Blanche was naked, Dr. Guerneau said. I advise you not to upset the poor woman any more with your continued insistence. She is very aware of what we want and agrees to it. Give me the deed and I will have her sign it. Remember Dr. G? He's the one who listened to everything Louise told him about Blanche without examining her or confirming any of it himself. So this makes sense to me. Louise probably told him how fragile Blanche was and how easily she could be upset and how important it was not to disturb her. Just enough concern to make sure Dr. G would keep everyone out of that room. So Blanche could sign over her property to the last person in the world who should have that power. Later at trial, lawyer Bowden testified. I hesitated, as the situation was a little unorthodox. But then, having confidence in the doctor and knowing that the power of attorney would only be used for just things, I gave him the document he had already signed. So Dr. G went into Blanche's room alone. He returned a few moments later with the signed document. Now, do you think Blanche was actually aware of what they wanted? Of what she was signing away? And why do you think the doctor was so keen to go along with all of this? Was he protecting a vulnerable patient? Or protecting Louise's control over her? Do you blame the notary or the lawyer for lacking due diligence, or for not insisting on seeing Blanche themselves, for not verifying that she understood what was happening? Because with that power of attorney, Louise got everything she wanted. She escaped the time-consuming, expensive legal process of judicial interdiction, which would have an uninterested party take care of Blanche's property. She avoided the publicity that would have dragged their family into the open and unraveled the whole situation. She kept in total control. And later that same year, in 1882, Dr. Guerneau dies. I was unable to uncover what from, but the Monniers get a new family doctor. Less than a full year later, on April 21st, 1883, Louis, Louise's father, dies and his will is read. And Louis left everything to his one and only daughter, Louise. Remember earlier when I asked what you thought about Louis' opinion on his daughter and her husband? For me, the reports about him refusing to attend Émile's funeral is probably more likely to have been about his illness rather than disgust for their behavior. If he truly had disgust for them, why leave your entire estate to her and skip a funeral, which would have been super taboo to do? Louise still to this point has everyone wrapped around her little finger, and it makes sense to me that she just as equally manipulated her parents too about what was going on with Blanche. But of course, tell me what you think. Now, here's something odd, I think. It was no secret that Louis had promised his grandson Marcel that even though the pension would legally stop after his death, remember the signed wedding contract? He'd make sure Marcel would still receive that 2,500 francs every year through his daughter Louise. So he left everything to Louise for her to distribute to Marcel. I don't know why he decided to do it that way, especially when he promised he would see to it that Marcel still got the money. And it shows, I think, his trust in his daughter Louise to do the right thing. I find that fascinating. And not to my shock in any case, Louise kept every franc for herself. Never mind what her father promised Marcel. Never mind that they were both sitting on more wealth than they could spend in a lifetime. Louise wanted it, so she took it. And the relationship between Louise and Marcel shattered after that, and it never truly healed. So Marcel gets his fortune and lives happily with his wife and daughter. Louise also got what she wanted, in a way. Marcel is still financially dependent on her, and she's not being kicked out of her home to the street. Now, do you remember Theodore Touchard? He was the neighbor with the wife and children that Blanche used to visit, the man who witnessed Blanche meeting with Victor. He also happened to be a plasterer, a skilled craftsman who finished the interior walls and ceilings of houses by applying wet, lime-based plaster over wood. We've mostly replaced that method with drywall these days, just to give you some context on what that might be. So Louise hires Theodore to fix a cracked fireplace in Blanche's room. And when he went inside the attic room, he said the smell hit him immediately. Feces and urine so thick it was suffocating. But Blanche wasn't in the room, which is consistent with other accounts of Louise moving Blanche over to the empty room next door whenever someone came upstairs. But Theodore could hear Blanche. From the room next to him, Blanche's voice came through the wall, and she said, "My mother has told everyone that I'm a crazy woman. There is no justice." And this too lines up with what other witnesses have said. Maids who worked in the house over the years testified that the only time Blanche ever left her room was when something needed fixing, like the cracked fireplace that Theodore repaired. They'd moved Blanche to the room next door, clean the filth, air it out, and let the repairman go in. Think about that for just a second here. They only cleaned the room when someone was coming in to see it, which means they knew exactly how appalling it was. They knew what they were hiding. It's called consciousness of guilt. And when everyone left, Blanche went back in the room. Back to the torn wallpaper, the rotten parquet floors, the broken furniture, a room held together by nothing really and propped up on the suffering of a woman no one was supposed to notice. It's now a couple of more years later in early 1885, and Victor Cameil is dead at age 51 years old. I was unable to find any obituary or death record to show how he died, but the word unexpected death was used several times, which sort of suggests to me a sudden illness or accident of some kind, but it is completely unclear. However, Blanche never got to see him again. Not after her mother forbade it and the bromide started dismantling her mind. Not once in all those years. Victor lived in the same town where gossip spread like wildfire. He must have heard something. Rumors, maybe, about what happened to the Monnier girl. But did he know she didn't leave him by choice? I hope Victor knew she loved him. I hope somehow that he learned Blanche never stopped wanting to be with him, because if he died thinking she just walked away without a care, that would be one more thing stolen from her. By 1892, Blanche has been on bromide for over 15 years. 15 years of a drug that was sedating her, slowly accumulating in her system, quietly doing damage that nobody at the time fully understood. And we know how Blanche felt about it because someone was writing it down. On August 16, 1892, a witness recorded Blanche's own overheard words in a diary entry. "What have I done to be locked up? I don't deserve this horrible torture. God must not exist then to let his creatures suffer in this way, and no one to come to my rescue." And life in that house just kept moving forward. One morning, Marie Fazy is walking down the street on the opposite side of the Monnier home. She stops in front of a café to speak to the owner, Désiré Bricot. He is hosing down the sidewalk, cleaning up a bit, and it's a bit of an awkward exchange that went something like this. "Marie, your café is beautiful and you keep it so clean." Désiré: "Why, thank you. And how have you been?" Marie: "I must tell you about the very awful things happening at number 21 that keeps me up at night." Desiree, why, whatever do you mean? Marie, in that house, the daughter is totally crazy. And the woman who is supposed to be taking care of her doesn't bother at all. She just leaves the poor woman in a locked room that's littered with excrement and rotten food. It's filthy. Come with me and I'll show you. Desiree, oh no, it's none of my business, but I will forward this information to the health inspector to investigate. Desiree is true to his word, and not too much time passes before the health inspector, a Monsieur Garnier, makes a call on the Monnier house. A young maid answers the door, and he tells her why he is there. And she says, what you are asking for is impossible. No one ever enters this house. Garnier presses her because he does have the authority to be there as a complaint has been filed regarding the health concern. So the maid has to relent, and she points him around to the back. On his way towards the back of the house with the enclosed space, he runs into Marie Fazy. And without saying a word or a polite bonjour, she starts swinging a walking stick at him and screams, "Thief! Murderer!" Understandably, the inspector is shaken up by this, and he gets the hell out of there. He never followed up again, which is insane, but I also kind of get it. There's something I have yet to mention about Marie Fazy. She has a bit of a drinking problem. In fact, by this point, she was known throughout the neighborhood as Les Soulines, meaning the drunkard. Marie reportedly spent hours over the stove, drinking glass after glass of wine. And over time, she couldn't get through a single day anymore without it. Because Blanche had been medicated in prison for almost 20 years now, and her care needs were full time. And Louise, as she does, found a solution. She bribed Marie with expensive wine. And if that tells you anything about how desperate Louise was to get Blanche off her hands, frugal Louise, the woman who weaponized food and chamber pots, was spending enormous amounts of money on monthly wine bills. There are literal receipts. And it worked. Marie agreed to switch her role from cook to caretaker. She moved her bed to the stair landing right outside of Blanche's room. And this was quite the calculated move by Louise because remember, Marie was the only person on earth who could calm Blanche down. The only one who could get her to cooperate. Louise knew exactly what she was buying. It didn't take long before Marie was managing the entire household, though. The maids kept quitting after all. Working for Louise and caring for Blanche created a turnover rate that speaks for itself. So Marie just absorbed everything. And Louise still refused to allow Blanche any clothes or bed sheets. And I wonder why Louise would even care at this point. Marie was handling everything. Blanche was locked away, out of sight, out of mind. Louise could, if she really wanted to, essentially forget she even had a daughter. So why go out of her way to make sure Blanche had nothing? That's not neglect, that's intention. And Marie, unable to bear the weight of what she was witnessing every single day, just poured another glass and drank until she couldn't feel it anymore. Thinking back to when Marie chased away the health inspector, screaming at him, calling him a thief and a murderer, Marie appeared to be the most caring person in that house at that point. So why would she do something so aggressive? Because I believe that drinking the way Marie was drinking, heavily and daily for years, doesn't just affect your liver, it affects your mind. And one of the cruelest things alcohol does with long-term abuse is it starts to dismantle your brain in a way that looks a lot like dementia. Alcohol-related dementia can cause paranoia, sudden irrational rage, confusion, an inability to regulate emotions or read situations clearly. You might lash out at someone doing nothing wrong because your brain can no longer distinguish between a threat and a stranger at the door. So a health inspector shows up, someone whose entire job is to check on living conditions, and Marie screams him off the property like he's come to destroy them. Was she protecting Louise? Protecting herself? Or was she just too far gone to know the difference anymore? I think by this point, Marie wasn't really Marie anymore. Just like Blanche wasn't really Blanche anymore either. This house had a way of doing that to people. But nevertheless, Marie persisted in her duties, and on May 26, 1895, she received the Medal of Honor from the Society for the Encouragement of Good. The certificate read, Marie Fazy, 45 years of service in the same house, awarded for having shown, during those long years of service, great dedication and constant loyalty. Organizations like this were quite common across provincial France during the 19th century, particularly after 1870 during the Third Republic. They emerged from a broader tradition of bourgeois and Catholic philanthropy that flourished in both small and larger French towns. Their core purpose was to recognize and publicly reward everyday virtue demonstrated by ordinary people, particularly working class individuals, servants, laborers, and nurses. Society members would nominate individuals who had served a family faithfully for decades, cared for the sick or elderly without recognition, or shown unusual moral character in difficult circumstances. The awards were often small cash prizes, medals, or certificates, and the ceremony itself was the real recognition, a public acknowledgement in a society where such workers were otherwise largely invisible. Understandably, by today's standards, Marie Fazy deserved more than one stinking certificate for 45 years of service, not just in one household, but in that household. At the time, this would have been a genuinely meaningful honor. Now, here's where I need you to weigh in, because I genuinely don't know how I feel about this next part, and I'm not even sure it matters, honestly, but here's what I'm thinking. Marcel was a member of this society, and as we just established, society members are the ones doing the nominating. So Marcel, a member, nominated someone in his own family's household for an award recognizing her decades of loyal, selfless service, which, fine, that's not shady on its face. A dedicated servant deserves recognition, full stop. But does it at all give you even the tiniest pause? Because it did for me. Was this simply an Occam's razor sort of thing, and the most straightforward explanation being the correct one? A good woman finally getting recognition for everything she's poured into this family for over 4 decades? Or was Marcel, after all those years, reminding everyone of the sacrifices they'd made for Blanche? To make sure people knew what they had all been through, and that, yes, Blanche was still sick. I could absolutely be reaching here, and maybe I am, but that's the maddening thing about selfish people. They're so good at making their angles look like generosity that you can never quite tell where the kindness ends and the calculation begins. Less than a year later, at the end of April 1896, Marie became so ill that she had to be bedridden, and that iron bed she was bound to was in Blanche's room. Did Louise make her stay there with Blanche, or did Marie find comfort in being near Blanche, a woman she had practically cared for her entire life as if she were her own daughter? Just 3 weeks later, on May 16th, 1896, Marie died. She was 60 years old. And before Blanche even had a chance to realize something was wrong or missing, Louise had already made sure she wouldn't find out. She had Marie's body quietly moved to the room next door before Blanche could see, ask, or even understand what was happening around her. I think about that a lot. Did Blanche ever get any closure? Did she notice Marie was even gone one day and never come back? Or did she even ask about her? And if she had asked about her, what did Louise say about it? Did she lie, tell the truth? Did she sit down and actually tell Blanche what happened? Did she say nothing at all and just redirect the conversation the way you do with someone you've decided doesn't deserve the full truth? We don't know. And honestly, given everything we know about how this family handled difficult information, at least where Blanche was concerned, I'm not holding my breath that it went with kindness. So now arrangements needed to be made, and although not a legal obligation, it was common for the family who hired the servant to pay for funeral expenses. Remember, this is a time of great social pressure. Not paying for Marie's funeral expenses would look bad for Louise, so she had to juggle her frugality and desire to be seen in high regard. So she offered Marie's family to pay for half of Marie's funeral expenses. Before the funeral, Marie's family came to collect her belongings from the Monnier house. Reportedly, Louise could not even bother speaking to them. Imagine, just imagine, not acknowledging the grieving family of someone who served you for 45 years, standing right there in your home. She sent her daughter-in-law Angel to speak to them instead, and to show them to Marie's belongings. And what Marie's family found was a chest containing a box of savings totaling 10,000 francs. But rather than leaving Marie's family in peace, Angel runs straight back to Louise to tell her about the money. And Louise, being Louise, tells the family that in light of all this cash, she won't be contributing to the funeral after all, but she will buy a wreath for the coffin. So generous of her. The woman who had spent years as Blanche's main human contact and carer and moved through the attic with any trace of kindness is gone. And Louise, sitting on Blanche's inheritance cash, couldn't be bothered to help pay for the funeral. That is the only one whom Blanche had left in her life. And yet, Somewhere out there in Poitiers, someone with a conscience was picking up a pen and setting it to paper to end this and open the door that never should have been closed. In part 4, that door finally opens to help, and Blanche has been waiting a very long time. Meet me there with her. À la prochaine. See you next time.